I have with me Jim Bauer of Bauer Trading, who has some thoughts about today's
I essentially have watched all these reports for almost 4 decades, and I've learned, kind of the hard way that sometimes it's not what the report says from a numerical standpoint or statistical standpoint or economic backdrop. It's really how the market behaves and reacts to the report. And I think the initial reaction to this report was certainly negative pretty much across the board. But as you know, the market has responded, at least so far into the trading session, relatively positive. And I think there are several reasons why that is happening. And first and foremost is this market is very, very globally oriented in structure. And when you look at these global numbers, it appears to me from a statistical standpoint, these could end up being the most, or let's say the highest global numbers for as far as stocks that we're going to see, in my opinion. I think the USDA is being relatively optimistic. Granted, conditions so far in the Northern Hemisphere are reasonably good, but certainly we are a long, long ways from guaranteeing trend line or above trend line your crops this year. So, what am I going to take issue with this particular report? When you look at the USDA number this morning on the 2009-2010 U.S. ending stocks at 1.738 billion bushels, that compares to the trade estimate of 1.853 billion. So that is a positive number, and they did have that in there. And I think that's a little bit more important than maybe some of us were led to believe, because that shows that even with a big, big corn crop throughout the world, we're still drawing those U.S. ending stocks downward. Remember, that particular number compares to 1.899 billion in the month of April. And we continue to see the Chinese nibble underneath this market on setbacks, not only from a U.S. standpoint, but from an international standpoint. Now, when you look at the USDA number for corn for 2009-2010 global stocks at 147.04, that's almost 2.5 to almost 3 million metric tons more than the April estimate of 144.2 million metric tons. So where are they coming with us, or towards us with that number? And I think this is where I question just what they're analyzing here. But when I look at the fact that the Chinese are underneath this market, they've got corn being released out of their reserves, they're basically sourcing corn on setbacks. They've got some cash corn prices in parts of China as high as $7.20 a bushel cash. Where does the market justify that type of price if we had such big production numbers? In other words, on the April estimate, the government put the Chinese number at 155 million metric tons, but it left it the same for this month at 155 million metric tons, even with all the backdrop to what I just alluded to about there's some issues about what the size of that crop really was. So personally, and again, I underline the word personally, I think the USDA is somewhere between 5 to 12 million metric tons too high on the 09-10 Chinese corn production number. Then, on top of that, when you drop down to look at what they project for 2010-2011 Chinese projected production, they put it at a whopping 166 million metric tons. That's 11 million tons more than what this year's crop was, and they thought this year's crop was a good crop. So I think there's a definite issue about that. And you take all that production and you overlay with the fact that every single setback we're starting to see the Chinese or Asian buyers who are anxious come in, it tells me that I think that the USDA is probably a little bit off and will be forced to bring those demand numbers higher as we go into the middle to latter part of 2010. I don't have too much issue with the soybean situation. We know that they raised the Brazil crop up to 68 million metric tons, a huge crop, and of course that has to compete with U.S. beans. But I do think beans will probably be a little bit better supported on setbacks than most people think, although there is technical resistance on the new crop November beans at 960 to 966. From a wheat standpoint, wheat, as you know, is the most global, but wheat will obviously fall into some degree of sympathy with corn. I won't take too much issue with the all-winter wheat production number for 2010, 2011 at 1.458 billion, but that is above the trade estimate of 1.434. I think we still have to watch the situation in the former Soviet Union including Russia and Ukraine. That area was dry and will need rain. And I think looking out ahead towards 2010, 2011 projected U.S. ending stocks at 997. I think that maybe is a little bit optimistic because we're starting to see a little bit of hesitancy about putting those yield factors that high as well as acreage. So all in all, I think what I'm trying to say is for producer is to try to leave your delivery points as open as possible. Try to work and track and analyze the basis level on a daily basis. I think there's going to be some very interesting basis play. Use the board for protectional purposes, but again, I would be very hesitant about using specific futures fixed or forward contracts with very little flexibility once you've made that decision. I think 2010, 2011 will be characterized by a market that needs flexibility, and you've got to watch this basis thing because that situation is handled correctly.